could you open the door and put a cup of coffee on for me as well? My valuable assistant.
There we go.
You
Well,
need one.
yeah, I need one. My assistants are all under 3 feet tall, so they're not particularly helpful. All right. Well, welcome everyone to the second installment of Ask Lovecraft After Dark, our little chat show where we get together and just have ourselves a intimate time. I am really excited to get to share with y'all one of my favorite filmmaker friends, an absolute delight. We've gotten into more fights over the Confederate flag than I think I've gotten over with anyone else. Lawrie Brewster's here. Lawrie, welcome to the show.
Hi guys, and hi Lehman, and thank you so much, my friend, for having me on.
Oh, of course.
Such a
Well,
cool show, and
as I was telling Lawrie right before we started, I wanted to get him on pretty quickly because he's got a time-sensitive project happening right now over on Kickstarter. He is doing the fourth crowdsourced film project. Is this your number 4 for you guys?
yes, that's right. So this film, Automata, is our most ambitious attempt yet. You could say we're
So,
trying to
yeah.
combine The Devils with Barry Lyndon and The Shining. Those are the
Oh.
three, and we have this cosmological horror bent and this gothic horror bent that we're kind of combining.
So again, this is your 4th Kickstarter project, so you must really hate yourself. Is that really what this boils down to? Like putting yourself through the meat grinder 4 times?
I mean, doing Kickstarters is a challenge, but the thing is, because we take such pride in like designing and manufacturing the products ourselves. So, for example, like the Blu-rays, the T-shirts, we're already doing that, as well as making the films. But at least with Kickstarter, it lets us, communicate directly with the folks that are most passionate about our films. And as a filmmaker, often it's not always a distributor that is as passionate. So having the direct relationship with people that are interested in our films that's what Kickstarter allows, and it's the 4th because all the other 3 have been kind of successful, and so much that people have got on board with the project and with the larger vision as well for the company, which is to produce these gothic Lovecraftian films.
And we should let folks know, if they're not already familiar, they should be. Hex Media, you guys have put out Lord of Fears,
Yep.
The Unkindness of Ravens, and was it Black Gloves? Yes, Black Gloves. There we go.
Yep.
And each one of these projects has been bigger and more ambitious than the last. I mean, I remember when you were working on Lord of Fears, and I mean, I was pretty blown away by that. But it seems like you guys really push yourself with each project. Is this something that being kind of fully in control through Kickstarter, through being an independent film company allows you to do, or is it a real struggle to kind of, be pushing the pushing the line each time?
Yeah, it can be a challenge. I mean, there's all kinds of challenges you'll encounter in terms of trying to produce more ambitious films. But the reason we've been able to make more ambitious films is because more folks have gotten involved in helping us to make the films on Kickstarter. Sure, there'll be like some investors that will get on the side, but really it's the Kickstarters that make all the difference. So, for example, if we'd struggled, the films would be a more similar level, or but it's because we've had the extra support, and so we've decided to put that extra support and any money, any orders for our goodies directly into the films. So, hence, with Automata, we've got these scenes that are set in the 18th century with powder wigs and all this Marquis de Sade kind of debauchery, as well as this Mario Bava-esque contemporary narrative that intertwines with it, where there's wild colours and sensuality, all based around, of course, clockwork automatons and the uncanny valley.
Now, at this point with these 4 films, have you essentially created a Hex Media cinematic universe? Are you trying to like stay in canon, or are you allowing these to kind of be their own thing each time?
I think you're right. There's a universe. And of course, guys, on our Kickstarter, you can get all 4 films if you haven't ever watched any of them. The most important thing about all our films, Lehman, is that the spine art on each package has a Roman numeral, which means that if you only buy 1 and 4, your life is incomplete. You
That's
really need. I think the only reason I make the films is because it looks so satisfying seeing these nicely colored packages with Roman numerals that match.
well, and
So
if you really want to just like aggravate someone, or you create like some piece that's utterly like maddening and horror, you just put that Roman numeral in the opposite part of the spine. So
okay, that would cause a riot.
they just
You know,
they just did that with National Geographic magazines. They've like swapped where the date goes on them.
I think I would be, out on the streets. The one thing that like the folks that like get our movies, they're really passionate about design aesthetic and like quality. So that's why each of the movies is like 3 discs and all this fancy artwork and everything. I think it's also because you know how most films are distributed on video on demand now, digital. Well, it just feels like there's nothing to own. So you spend a year or a year and a half of your life making a film, you kind of want something tangible to hold. So again, distributors, they're not interested much in physical editions now. Like the DVD market is collapsing for them. And then we are totally going against the wind with this extra focus on trying to make Blu-rays, 3 disc sets, and all that kind of stuff way more special. Because when you were growing up, like myself, that we liked collecting movies because we wanted to replicate our favorite section in a horror rental store, in a VHS rental. It's like that was basically it. And we can still have that. And I want to try and encourage that. If only because I need my artwork to count for more than just being something on a pen drive or on an Amazon website. To
No,
answer
that's
your
yeah.
question, by the way, about the universe, absolutely. We share a great passion for the creative mind of H.P. Lovecraft, and I'm sure you probably would agree that one of the most inspiring elements was the universe he created. Um, Now, obviously, I will always be shit compared to H.P. Lovecraft, but as an inspiration, though, the idea of creating stories that act as small windows into a much bigger universe of unexplained, inexplicable things, that is fascinating to me. So I like to think of each of our films as a kind of documentary into what might exist in an infinite universe somewhere. And
Okay, so that's
so
that
there's
that's
some canon, and we like to connect stuff.
and so yeah, so how, given that this is a nominally Lovecraftian show, how have you incorporated love? Like, what does Lovecraft mean to you? Does Lovecraft just mean like tentacles and people in straitjackets? Is Lovecraft someone like staring into the void and screaming? Like, what elements of his work? Because there's a lot, and there's a lot you can kind of grab from. It's a toy box. What do you feel you've been plucking out of that particular toy box?
Well, that is such an interesting question, based especially on my experience being a Scottish guy, because for a lot of the Americans in the audience, their experience of Lovecraft and cosmological horror will carry a different predisposed cultural background. So what I mean by that is, for example, in Britain we have the Gothic tradition. Now, of course, in America there's Edgar Allan Poe. There's a rich Gothic tradition there as well. But in Britain, Gothic horror is a much more traditional perception of horror. So the idea of cosmological horror that Lovecraft does, which he combined with Gothic elements. I mean, that was his inspiration. But the cosmological aspect was a lot more. It was taken by a lot of fans like myself and my younger generations as more intellectual and really trippy, like almost. And it's funny, I mean, you've got Lovecraft as a kind of as an avowed atheist, but at the same time, his cosmological perspectives and ideas are almost spiritual in terms of how they engage with the imagination. So it would almost feel like you were taking LSD reading one of Lovecraft's stories. Um, and so they blew my mind. And again, like with the British horror tradition, it's so steeped in Gothic. The idea is that your ghosts are in graveyards. There's this, and there's great stuff. M.R. James, Henry James as well. Writers that would take that and move forward. But the additional elements that Lovecraft brought, wow. So the way they affect my work mostly is by inspiring us to try and be more profound with what we're exploring. And so it contributes to trying to make us elevate our work, so that it can have something to say about the universe as well as the supernatural, or to draw interpretations that allow for one to perceive the story in a supernatural context or a psychological context, or just this other road, which is the Lovecraftian aspect, which is the cosmological interpretation. And that's what I find most interesting. I think Lovecraft was a great cosmological philosopher. Sure, he had his issues, as we know, in terms of politics and racial views of the time, but in terms of cosmological and imagination, it's really inspiring and is still, I think, ahead of his time.
No,
So,
it's fascinating to see how he sort of was responding to, sort of changes in how, we were perceiving the universe. A fellow Islander, Charlie Strauss, has a really great lecture that he gives talking about, how just the physical size of the universe changed, like, or at least our perspective of it changed, at a rate comparable to how, sort of computer hard drives and speed have changed for our generation. Like in Lovecraft's lifetime, just the universe went from that to this sort of explosive, incomprehensible size, and what that does to you if you're someone who's fascinated in stars and astronomy, in exploring the cosmos. And that's the science of that is changing. The technology about that is changing. And in many ways, I have to imagine it's like being a filmmaker and seeing how film has
yeah,
changed so much. I mean, for seemingly being so static for a while, right? I mean, if you think about, film in the 70s, 80s, 90s, special effects are getting better in some ways, but, the model of how they're going about being made is not too drastically different. I mean, Star Wars is kind of a big explosive thing, but, sort of how the blockbusters go, how distribution goes. And then suddenly, bam, the last, 20 years, even 10 years, there's been such a sea change, and it feels like a completely unrecognizable playing field.
no, you're right. And I mean, companies such as film production companies and distributors and even fans themselves of films are all racing to adapt to the new opportunities this reality gives. I mean, at the same time, though, I feel that one of the inspirations for our films is in reaction against some of those changes as well.
Sure.
For example, when I think any of our films, you know, however profound I might explain our influences to be, the vital ingredients for every story we make is always characters, emotion, and story. These are the fundamental elements. It won't be necessarily style or engagement with the current pop cultural zeitgeist. You know, these kind of things, which, if you're thinking in a more cynical way as a producer, would be what you want to tap into. So, for example, if you're a producer making horror right now, you would want to make a PG-13 paranormal film with a very slick aesthetic. And at the moment in the normal industry, we're also seeing a kind of revitalized noughties style horror based around ensembles of teenagers, you know, kind of like Final Destination, things like that. Um, in some respects, you could say our films have never been in fashion in terms of the mainstream. Like, but they're so inspired by a type of horror that we feel never goes out of fashion, with those that are mostly inspired by horror literature, like Poe. For example, like what inspired me to get into film was watching the Roger Corman adaptations of Edgar Allan Poe with Vincent Price. And then I read all of Edgar Allan Poe, you know, over the course of like a week or something, you know, and it led me to Lovecraft as well, and M.R. James and Henry James, and all my favorite authors. And there's just not companies making films like that. Um, and that's kind of what we're doing. Of course, we've got a modern spin on it because we want to talk about modern stuff as well. But there's something about these old films that we just want to breathe life back into.
So what you're saying is we're not going to be seeing Cloverfield's Automata anytime soon.
Yeah, and you know, if everyone is bitching on Twitter about one thing, one agenda type item, we won't be rushing to make a horror film that metaphorically exploits that. Now it's funny, you know, because it's not to say that our films don't have political or social commentary aspects. Like, you know, Sarah's got deeply held views about the role of women in film and the society that she likes to explore and subversively explore in her writing. But it just, what it means is that we wouldn't go chasing the trendy dollar just to make a cheap buck. And as you know, anything that's clickbaity, which to be honest affects a lot of film and TV shows and stuff like that now, it reduces stuff. It reduces the quality, I feel. So we try to be different to that. You know, we're more interested in what some 45-year-old bearded guy thinks who has a collection of old horror books than some 23-year-old vlogger.
Well, and how is I mean, obviously you've got a very passionate core, but how has kind of reception been out sort of an immediate sort of ring outside of that? Do you find that people are intrigued by this very different approach or this kind of countercultural approach? Are they kind of like turning up their nose and being like, what is this? You know, I don't understand. You know, what's been that kind of reaction outside of the kind of immediate fold?
Yeah, well, it is kind of a mix because I'm involved in the industry. I'm integrated to an extent with that, sometimes as a freelance producer and things like that. As a distributor as well, we'll talk with other distributors. I mean, mostly they think what we're doing is great, but they also think it's like not something that could be replicated. I think they basically think that what we do in terms of like making films and then distributing films and making like fancy physical packages instead of VOD and everything like that, they think that we maybe got lucky with this weird idea. And it's strange because say for example, like with the Black Gloves was the biggest UK film Kickstarter ever. But a distributor would just be like, nah, it just doesn't fit with my model of what normal success should be. You know, because the film's too strange. It's like, that's a black and white film. It's set in the 1940s. You're inspired by Alfred Hitchcock's Rebecca. Ugh, that doesn't sound like my kind of Daphne du Maurier. No. And yet, the reason it could be that successful, or hopefully Automata as well, or Automata, if I pronounce it correctly, is because people have a passion for a type of film and storytelling that isn't being represented. And it is very cynical. I know because I work with these companies sometimes and people, and they look for the lowest common denominator, the easiest buck, the person most likely to engage with press, with stories, which are young people on social media, then that pushes further and further away a more mature audience, which can include young people that are just interested in mature or older themes and ideas. Just poof, gone. And that's exactly who we're trying to target. And that's exactly why we're trying to build a community around our company, around our studio, because we want to challenge this assertion that it has to be like this, you know, to be successful or cool.
No, that's very true. I'm going to take a little break. We have some comments from our watchers at home. Remember, if you want to watch these interviews live, you need to join the Ask Lovecraft Appreciation Society, the most tasteful Lovecraft group out there, also the most attractive, I found. The average anarchist opines, H.P. Lovecraft is the inventor of modern horror. Even PG-13 slashers take inspiration from things like Reanimator. So do you feel like Lovecraft's DNA is essentially in every horror film out there? Or do you think there's something sort of unique that you're able to bring to bear on films?
Well, I mean, this is really, I think it comes down to a matter of opinion, quite speculative one at that, because my experience of the effects of Lovecraft are limited, obviously, to being in Scotland, being Scottish. So one draws a kind of international opinion, but without really that being informed. For me, I would say that because I kind of saw H.P. Lovecraft in the perspective of quasi-cosmological occultism that seemed quite profound and sophisticated and different, then I would think that if one was to say that Lovecraft is embellished or is in everything, or has inspired and stuff like that, it's certainly possible, but I don't know if that necessarily means that his art is understood or appropriately reflected or expressed. And that's not to say that, Cthulhu fridge magnets are a bad thing, but I know that if I'd experienced the Cthulhu fridge magnets, that wouldn't have been the cultural inspiration on my work. It was the interpretation of his writing. And I think that's when you take Lovecraft and you extrapolate it beyond the stories into this broad pop culture that surrounds him, and say, because to me that would be the predominant influence, if you were to say, is the regurgitated pop cultural version of his works. Then yes, he's certainly had impact, but that doesn't necessarily mean that he's had the right impact on every occasion or on the broader occasion.
Well, and Lovecraft also was really good at taking disparate sort of threads that were already there. I mean, you mentioned James, but also Machen, Ambrose Bierce, Poe, and kind of combining them and creating this new kind of horror and branding it really well. I mean, that's the thing I go on about is, Lovecraft is a really amazing brand. I mean, not good enough to feed himself while he's alive, but now he's a fantastic brand. No one may have ever heard of, Lord Dunsany. But they might be familiar with of Kadath, and what the sort of the elements of Dunsany that Lovecraft brought to his work. A thing I always kind of chuckle at is how, in the modern eye, the King in Yellow has become a Lovecraftian entity, even though that was Robert W. Chambers, who was around before Lovecraft and was actually a much more successful writer during Lovecraft's days, and even after Lovecraft's days. And yet something about that brand, something about what Lovecraft, how he captures the imagination as a person, I think makes that sense of what his kind of impact on modern horror maybe broader than it is. I think there is a lot of impact there because people like King were reading him, people like Gaiman are reading him. He's sort of a writer's writer, and a lot of that sort of cosmic horror is seeping through. But whether we can sort of, look at, Lovecraft talk about dreams, and there's dreams and Nightmare on Elm Street. So obviously,
totally.
There's a direct byline. I don't know if I
I totally get your point, and I would agree with it. I mean, Lovecraft himself, what proportion of his own ideas are the manifestations of all those inspirations that he readily admitted to. In his earlier stories, he is like in awe of the people that have inspired him. And his work is almost like his versions of their already successful stories that inspired them. And there's a humility to his earliest writings that suggests that, which means that his fans shouldn't automatically assume, therefore, that he created everything that has the Lovecraft brand associated with it.
And he was very generous, right? He was very generous with his creations, with his world. He opened up his toy box for people to play in, and I think that's a huge impact. That is that kind of open sourcing cosmic horror in a way, as opposed to really kind of clamping down on it. No, you can't use Cthulhu, you can't use Nyarlathotep, they're mine. I think that speaks to how he's exploded and how he's been able to have such a great market penetration in the last few decades.
Like with our own films, like The Lord of Tears, The Unkindness of Ravens, and even The Black Gloves and Automata, like those reflect what Lovecraft says to me in terms of like what he is, as well as other horror influences, cinematic and from literature. There's films like Reanimator are probably one of the most common ways people would engage with Lovecraft in terms of cinema, and it's funny because like it's a horror comedy, and it's great fun. It's one of my like fun movies. But I think in some respects it typifies the broader American realization of Lovecraft, as opposed to the European, who seem to take him like, for example, if I was reading H.P. Lovecraft, honestly, under no circumstances would my first inspiration be to produce a comedy based on his work. And that's not to say there's an issue with the comedy, because it's great fun. Reanimator is brilliant. But it's interesting that is actually the more common prevalence, is to take a comic book style or a comic approach to Lovecraft.
That's funny, because someone in the audience just asked that. So Ranting Thespian said, "What are your thoughts on having Lovecraftian horror, having to alter Lovecraftian horror to appeal to a mass audience?" And he says, adding comedic relief, adding a semi-happy ending, or love interests. He pointed out before, there's not a great deal of romance in H.P. Lovecraft. except for Sweet Ermengarde. And Lord Almighty, I would be in a Sweet Ermengarde movie like that. I would be in a Sweet Ermengarde miniseries. That would be fantastic. Do you think that that's something that's needed? Do you think you have to add something to appeal to a wider audience for people to be able to even approach Lovecraft cinematically?
Well, when you're producing a film that is inspired by Lovecraft, it's kind of Lovecraftian. Therefore, it's not an adaptation of Lovecraft.
Yeah.
So again, we come back to our core elements of story, characters, and emotion. If even though it's a horror film, to have something that have characters you can connect with, that you feel for, that you care about, that you don't that they're not lecturing you, they're not soliciting your feelings in a simplistic way. You really you like them. You want to know what happens, but they're experiencing like spectacular phenomenon that is terrifying and weird and escalates as it goes along. That is good campfire storytelling, and that's what we always aim for. But we also do aim with that to have some kind of intellectual curiosity about the film. So the film will ask a question and then attempt to explore the answer, all whilst telling this great campfire story with Lovecraftian themes. Like that's how I approach Lovecraft. And I've never found that to make Lovecraft more appealing, that it requires me to reduce him to pop cultural elements that are more relatable to young people. It's far better to take an aspect of cosmological horror, which in a way it's all about us, not our fear of the unknown and our helplessness in the face of a huge universe and all these big existential questions. Put a young person on that hot seat and their imagination will come alive because suddenly they want to know some answers to these questions. Reduce it to a Cthulhu fridge magnet or a joke, then you're entertained, you laugh, but you don't walk out the theatre asking questions. And my inspiration with Lovecraft when I first read him was because he made me think. The same with other great writers. So we try to do that with film. We take his subject quite seriously. We don't take ourselves so seriously that we're po-faced. There's a charm and there's a warmth to our films that you would expect, like in Hammer, Amicus, or AIP films. Maybe a bit darker because tastes have become more adult since those films, but there's an element of warmth there. And I would like to see American film producers treat Lovecraft with the respect that he deserves. And now saying that, it's again like a lot of people like him in the comic book way. I mean, even like Guillermo del Toro. We were having a chat about Guillermo del Toro, who's an awesome guy. He said some nice things as well about our film, The Black Gloves. But you can tell he's a fan of comics. He would be more interested in the design of the Lovecraftian monster than perhaps the cosmological theme being explored, or perhaps not. That's the thing. But with American films in general, though, yeah, I'd like them to kind of try it a bit differently, maybe.
Wouldn't we all? Now, as a filmmaker, you have managed to do something which I think everyone who makes horror movies or watches horror movies wishes they could do. You've actually managed to craft a pretty iconic villain. I like calling him Albert. I believe that's not his official canon name, but your chilling owl man from Lord of Fears. I mean, this is something that's now been it's gone viral through your attempts at frightening folks out in the wild. And yeah, you've created this very striking visual creature. Is that visual? You've talked a lot about how you start with story and explore that. But with these films, also Automata, which is very visually striking, do you kind of approach from a visual point of view and then see what stories come out of that? Or do you have a story first and eventually, some homunculus begins to take form and life out of that?
Well, it would be the story first. And it's interesting because that question really, the answer either way is pretty much how you can split producers down the middle.
Okay.
And some producers, they will see them and neither approach is wrong, but they do lead to different kinds of films. So, for example, if you go for the visual approach first, it's very much the idea, the kink, what's going to work. It's a bit like being a fairground designer. You know, it's like, okay, what's the main attraction going to be? We're going to get these guys through the door. We're going to, you've never seen anything like this. 10 headshots in one action scene or something. And so, for example, modern adaptations, like films like that might be such as Lights Out, for example, which was I think it was a Blumhouse film that was produced based on a viral short film that's only 2 minutes long on YouTube called Lights Out. Woman flicks a light on and off, and when she switches it on the second time, there's like a shadow figure, and then when she switches it off and switches it on, closer. It's a 2 minute short film, got millions of views, and then got licensed for a feature film, which pretty much just takes that concept and makes it 90 minutes long. But in that example, though, you can see producers saw something they could, I guess you could call it a gimmick, but that's also an important part of film producing. So because we're storytellers, and because we're also really interested in the idea of mythos and creating a mythos and expanding it, the idea of the story is really important. And honestly, it's a bit like, even Sarah gets frustrated working with me at this stage because I tend to do a lot of the background writing. And the idea of creating something that is authentic, that feels like there is a history, that's really important. And so it can be annoying because you want to get to the point where you've got a simple idea that everyone can, like the Owlman, but actually the Owlman came about as like after a mountain of stuff finally led to his manifestation like that.
A mountain of madness, one might say.
Yes.
Now there's a question. Are you among the? We're seeing that in the chat as well. Do you mourn the ever just out of reach Del Toro at the Mountain of Madness, or do you feel like that's a project that's more sort of vaporware than anything else?
Well, it's a funny one because, like, I think I would be the best director to handle the Mountain.
I absolutely agree.
So I can't have Guillermo del Toro get there first. I mean, admittedly, he would have a slightly higher budget than me. I mean, well, it depends. It just depends on what you want from the Mountains of Madness adaptation. Like, for me, I would want something that had the tone of Kubrick's The Shining. I wish Stanley Kubrick could direct.
Oh, yeah, that's interesting.
That's the kind of tonality. See, like when we brought Lovecraftian themes to our films, like Ravens and Lord of Tears, people took those films seriously. And those films are built on the shoulders of giants, that inspired us. It can work. But in respects to In the Mouth of Madness, oops. Are you still there?
Oh, I'm here. Did I disappear on you? Oh dear. Hello.
Okay, well, you've still got a little picture there. So
okay, well, as long as you can hear me, that's the important part.
So yeah, in terms of In the Mouth of Madness, to me, my only concern would be if it ended up looking a bit like, over stylized.
Yeah.
Like Crimson Peak and.
I see what you're saying. Yeah.
And I kind of think there would be as much fuss made about the book getting released with the film that has all the design artwork, rather than just focusing on the characters and their emotions and how they feel experiencing being on the Mountains of Madness. It might just become geeky without the heart.
No, and that's something that Lovecraft definitely runs the risk of, right? I mean, I think he's been so picked over and so overanalyzed. And I mean, and you talk about how he's created this mythos, but he kind of created it accidentally. Like, I staunchly believe that he was not intending to sort of create a universe, sort of Tolkien style, like, all right, there's going to be the 5 layers of the gods. And, this one is, I think I like these names. I like Azathoth. I like Nyarlathotep. I'm going to play with it. This sounds vaguely Egyptian. I'm going to write a slightly Egyptian-y sort of story. And, this is going to be, I want to talk about the mad pipings that taking place here. And I'm going to use, these words again and again, because that is very evocative. And if you hear about the Necronomicon in one story, and then you hear about it again in another story, there's like, there's like kind of, is this book actually exist? There's a really delightful ambiguity. But I don't think he was as systematic. I don't think there's any evidence that he was as sort of systematic about creating a universe or a mythos. I think a lot of that is sort of projected based on Derleth, based on the role-playing games where you have to sit down and figure out, okay, now what is the Shoggoth? What is the Shoggoth's hit points? And just how many tentacles does Cthulhu have? Because that's going to impact the number of attacks he has per round.
Then it becomes forensic, doesn't it?
No, it does.
And I think that would be my issue with that adaptation, is that I think it would become a very visual, very forensic, very CGI filled kind of thing. And as I'm sure you'll agree, Lovecraft works when the premise of the unknown is what is inspiring you, not by seeing everything.
We have a special guest star. Yes, Amanda, how can I help you?
Hey, Michael.
Maybe, but I need you to give me about 10 more minutes. Can you give me 10 more minutes? All right. Thank you so much. Say hi. My co-producer popping in. Well, it's also the fact, Lovecraft is, the two things that, Lovecraft uses over and over again to describe his monstrosities is that they're unknowable and they're, sort of indescribable, both of which work really hard in a visual element like film.
Well, here's the thing. If you're watching a film, say with Cthulhu, would you rather see Cthulhu or rather be made to feel how it would look like to have seen Cthulhu? And that's the thing. If you leave feeling like, oh my god, like, what did I see? What was to capture, and that's all about good drama and writing, intensity, and characters. That's what brings you to that moment, because it's an emotional thing. Whereas literally seeing it, that's a CGI creation. That is a visceral thing, and it can end quite quickly.
Well, and it's also nothing, the truism of horror has always been, there's nothing you can design that can match, the infinite variety of what an audience will picture in their own head. Exactly. As soon as you've put the monster, in front of them, oh, okay, I guess that's what a Cloverfield monster looks like. Okay, that makes sense.
I think good filmmaking accentuates your imagination so that it's making you, contribute and create that feeling of wonder and fear and awe. That's tension. That's, it's the fear of approaching that door and opening it, and that being more intense than whatever you see on the other side. That.
Oh yeah, no, definitely. And I love
see enough of.
I love your image of the campfire story, right? Where it is just about drawing it out and sort of bringing people in. Those are some of the most evocative stories I can think of, and even when I can't remember the story, the feeling that sticks with you, decades later, of just sort of being wrapped in this very specific place and specific time. I think you're right. I think, the really good films are really good stories, because that's what we like. I mean, don't get me wrong, I still love my Leprechaun movies, and I think it would be a shame to do a Leprechaun movie where you can't see Warwick Davis, dancing and jigging all over the place, but as he murders people.
Aniston as well.
But now I can't let you go before I talk about the most terrifying film you've worked on. Which of course is the one that's had the most profound impact on my life, Morgan and Morganson's Date with Destiny.
Oh, really? Right? Yeah.
For folks who don't know, you and you've mentioned Sarah Daly, who's done a lot of writing with you. You guys worked with Joseph Gordon-Levitt's. Was it sort of a film company or kind of a collaborative project? What was sort of Hit Record's thing?
Well, it's really cool. It's funny because my background was in art, animation, graphics, and stuff like that. And Morgan and Morganson is like an animated film with live action actors, kind of moving a bit. It's a bit like the kind of George Melly kind of films, like The Trip to the Moon and things like that. It takes inspiration from that. So basically what happened was Sarah Daly, she wrote a fantastic script and she uploaded it to Joseph Gordon-Levitt's website, Hit Record, which is a website about trying to encourage collaboration with artists. It's quite a weird model, and it's not for everyone, but because it encourages folks to edit and revise things. And so it's not good for things that maybe you're precious about, but if there's things you're experimental about, then it can be a great factory for further ideas and inspiration. But anyway, Sarah uploaded it, and Joseph Gordon-Levitt didn't want anyone to touch it. He thought it was just perfect, and he cold called. So I was helping make dinner, and the phone rings, and it's just Joseph Gordon-Levitt. He's like, "Hey, can I speak to Sarah? It's Joseph Gordon-Levitt." Yeah,
spot
sure.
on.
Yeah, exactly. It's beautiful. So what happened from that was he told us that he'd already shot himself performing in the film in his apartment, and so then I ended up just cutting him out frame by frame and creating the visual world around him. And then with the second film, the Zeppelin Zoo, that we did, which also had Channing Tatum in it, we pitched that to Joe, and they developed that on hit record in collaboration with all the other artists. I was art director for it and edited it, and Sarah the writer, and we had the chance to hang out with them and work with them, and they're really nice people. And both those short films, they screened at Sundance. One of them got screened in front of Robert Redford, and the other one at South by Southwest. And then we did horror movies.
There we go. There you go. See, takes all sorts. Well, that's fantastic. Thank you so much for coming on the show and talking. So folks should know you've still got what, about a week or two more with Kickstarter?
I would say that if people are interested to check out more about our Gothic Lovecraftian thriller, that now is a great time for them to pledge, to check out, see what they like. I mean, we've got movies, T-shirts, posters. We've got our old movies. We also have our first book that we're making, which is it's a bit like it's a bit like the Dungeons and Dragons monster manual.
That is fantastic.
Well, it's based on our monsters, but it's also based on our demons and entities that we have in mind for future films. It includes stories, kind of like historical aspects as well, and it also even includes role-playing game rules as well.
So you really do know your audience.
No, I mean, it's just because it's like, wouldn't it be great to have the Owlman in your game of, say, Dungeons and Dragons, you know? But then I was like, well, what would the rules be? Because I like playing Dungeons and Dragons. You know, I don't get a lot of time, but I love it. So it was just a way of like, okay, let's combine these things. So at the moment in the campaign, it's pretty slow because it's the third week. If folks do pledge and check it out, that really helps us a lot because it'll push up the campaign on the website search thing, and heck, it helps us reach the goal.
Yes, which is always very helpful.
Yeah, because if we don't hit it, we don't get a penny, which means I come to live with you, Lehman.
There we go. Well, you know, there's my couch. It's all ready, Lawrie. Anytime. Okay.
I'll say as well that for folks that do consider pledging, that they don't get billed right away. So if they're saving money for beer this weekend, they don't need to worry because they'll only get billed on the 9th of May, again, if we reach the total.
I did one, it wasn't a Kickstarter, it was either a GoFundMe or an Indiegogo for a theater project. And I wasn't even like manning it. I was just part of the theater company that was doing it. And that was too stressful for me. Like I was, biting nails. Anytime that like I'm a stretch goal, for something when they're like, oh, and if you get this, Lehman Kessler will come out, like that's too much. Like I'm like, no, I can't handle the responsibility. I can't handle the pressure. So I think you are an absolute maniac for putting yourself through this. Obviously it's working. You guys have had amazing response, and I have no doubt you guys are going to meet your goal this time around. But those of you at home, don't take that risk. I want to see cool automata monster stuff happening. Okay. I want my Marquis de Sade business. Don't you dare take that away from me. That's all really cool. That's really exciting, Lawrie. Yeah. And I'm also excited about this book. This is my first of hearing about that. So I'm going to definitely be checking that out. Where can folks find you online? If they really are interested in following what's going on with Hex Media, find out what you're up to, what's the best place they can go?
Anyone watching this that's interested in what we're trying to achieve, the best thing to do is just to add me on Facebook, because
there we go.
I'm accessible, and I always love hanging out and chatting with fellow fans of the genre. I've always been accessible, and they should just add me on Facebook and say hi.
Alrighty. Well, that's fantastic. Thank you so much, Lawrie. I wish you all the best. I'm really excited to see where this is going, and I guess in a little while we'll see what you bring out for Kickstarter number 5 if you haven't just been dragged straight to hell by that point.
Yep. If I survive this one, there will be another one. If I survive.
You got this. You're fine. You're fine. Thank you all at home. Thank you for watching. Yeah, be sure to check out the Kickstarter. Be sure to check out all the other stuff. We'll have links for you about what Lawrie's done, and I hope you continue to follow, because Lawrie is ridiculously talented, ridiculously attractive, and he deserves all the luck and success the world has to offer. So thank you all at home. Thank you, Lawrie. I'll be around doing my Lovecraft thing. You know where to find me. Bye, all.
Bye, everyone.